And I would probably be talking about, this is crazy that I feel like I have to do this. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would probably be talking about, okay, if you're a Vaslorian, if you're the average person in Vasloria, let's talk about you. You're probably a peasant. You do not own the land that you work on. The notion of owning land probably doesn't occur to you, right? It's not a thing you can buy or sell. You don't live in very much of a cash-based economy in the first place, although there is cash. You are familiar with it. You probably are a peasant. You live in a town somewhere within a day or two's walk of a barony. And so let's talk about the calendar. Here's what you're going to be doing in winter. Here's what you're going to be doing in spring. Here's what you're going to be doing in summer. Here's what you're going to be doing in autumn. Here's what life is like for you. Here's where food comes from. And I would be doing that because I'm trying to establish a ground state for what does it mean when an adventurer shows up? Because to me, that is the point of medieval fantasy. The point of medieval fantasy is, here is this world where most people are medieval peasants with access to technology not much greater than a real medieval peasant. They've got local priests and witches and hedge wizards who have real magic, but these guys are like 0th level, right? So they've got some cantrips and stuff, and they can, so your standard of living is better than the average peasant. And I would probably make that point. And I did in the core rule books. I said, the average peasant lives a better life than a real medieval peasant did, but not much better. They have better life expectancy, better infant mortality, but they're not better educated. They don't have more access to justice, right? The point, and I would probably have to say this, is the reason I'm going to go into all this detail about what life is like as a normal person is because your character is not a normal person. And I want you, the reader, to understand what it means for an adventurer, for a 3rd level tactician to roll into town. It is a disruptive event, right? It presages. Well, what does it presage? Well, it presages the coming of violence. Conflict. And it's sort of like what we were talking about the other day about a revolution. How do you fix what's wrong? Well, I don't know how to do it other than a revolution. And you don't want a revolution to happen. You want slow incremental change, because the alternative is a revolution. And in a revolution, revolution is just another word for chaos. And once the revolution starts, neither you nor I or anybody watching this or anybody within sound of my voice has any control over what happens. And lots of people die, including good people, including people that you might wish had lived so they could be leaders in some kind of future. Nope, you don't get to decide that. You don't get to decide who comes out on top once there's a revolution. Right? So you want slow incremental change, ideally. Well, an adventurer showing up in town is a revolutionary event because they bring chaos. Before the adventurer showed up, you, the peasant, knew what was coming. You knew what tomorrow was going to bring, the same thing that yesterday brought. And you know that this summer is going to be mostly like last summer, and that'll probably be the same as next summer. Things don't change that much from one year to another. You know where food comes from. And you know if there's a crisis, you know why. It didn't rain enough. It didn't rain enough, or there were some brigands that came in. There's certain facts of life that you deal with, right? I heard a guy on NPR saying that they think that the human brain, not the human brain, the concept of a brains evolved specifically to reduce uncertainty. And that the thing brains do is they model the future so you can predict things like, will I be able, like, I remember hearing that cheetahs are so efficient that they don't have to think about this. They can't think about it. They don't have higher brain functions. They instinctively know when this gazelle they're chasing is not going to give them the calories they need to overcome the deficit they spent getting that gazelle. And they stop chasing. Right? The brains evolve to make the world more predictable, because if the world is more predictable, your chances of survival go up. If you can predict tomorrow so that you can plan for it today, if you can predict the next 8 seconds, even if you're a mantis shrimp, I'm just trying to predict what will happen. If I do this, then this will happen and I will get to eat, right? And that is the thing that the brain does. And that is what these peasants are doing. And that's what everybody's doing, is they're trying to impose some sort of order on their world to make it predictable, so that they know if somebody breaks the law, we'll deal with it locally temporarily, and then the Reeve will come by and we'll have a real trial and we'll see what happens. And but this is normal, and that I understand. And then an adventurer rolls in and literally all bets are off. Now they have no fucking idea what's going to happen next, because that adventurer has power beyond anything any of these people have ever experienced. A third level shadow could kill every single person inside the Baron's castle, and no one could do anything about it unless the Baron has a shadow of their own. Right? So that's the point, is I'm trying to establish that peasants are afraid of heroes. They distrust them. Why? Well, because I think that it is a critical step in the medieval fantasy adventurer's career, and they're probably going to have to do this more than once, when they get the locals on their side and they undergo risk and privation. They're going to go out into the forest and live off barks and twigs in order to stop that marauding manticore or goblin tribe, in order to save these people. And only after having done that do the people start trusting you. And that moment where the people are like, thank God, thank the gods must have sent you. These people hated us when we showed up. They told us there weren't any rooms in the inn, and then we said, we know there are rooms in the inn. They're like, fine. A room costs 100 gold. You're like, okay, I get it. You guys don't want us here, but you're gonna come around. You're gonna come around. We're gonna get you to like us. I don't know. Maybe that's a dumb thing to make a campaign setting about. Well, the good news is we've got capital and we've got the timescape, if you feel that way. But that's how I feel. In other words, I do not understand, and I'm not being critical of any one document. I don't understand what the point of setting your game or your campaign in a medieval fantasy land is if all you're looking for is just a coat of paint. Right? To me, there has to be some reason. Is that a silly thing to think? Probably, because the most popular fantasy settings have no bearing on reality whatsoever. That's the reason so many people that aren't into fantasy consider fantasy escapism, because they don't see any sense of, they see just nothing but wish fulfillment in here. But I like the idea that being an adventurer means winning these people over. They're the reason you're doing this, is because you're trying to make a difference. Drawsteel is not about getting rich. The characters you're not here to get gold. That's not what motivates Drawsteel heroes. It's doing the right thing. It's standing between the people and those with power who would victimize them. That's what being a hero in Drawsteel means. It's the subtext of everything in the book. That idea is spread everywhere in the book, is that the job of a Drawsteel hero is to stand between the people and the tyrants. And that's what makes it a fantasy, because in real life, there are no Jedi. That's why Andor is so visceral, is the space wizards aren't coming to save you. There aren't any space wizards. But in fantasy, there can be. You could be a space wizard. You could be the one that does the right thing. So yeah, it's a power fantasy, but is that a bad thing? I don't know. I don't think so. The fantasy of helping people, the fantasy of being the person who makes a difference, I wish more people had that fantasy. So my approach is, say, here's who the people are. Here's what it's like to be a peasant in this medieval world. So calendars are important. Calendars are, the only reason we know basically anything about the universe of value or interest is because of attempts on the part of human beings to figure out the calendar better. People need to know when Easter happens. Oh, okay. So you're telling me that just trying to figure out when Easter happened is the reason we understand atomic fusion? Yeah. Yes, it's a direct line from one to the other. Calendars are important. They are the schedule, because what is a calendar? It is an attempt to impose order on a chaotic world. We're going to name the months and the days so that we can predict them better. And the good news is they're pretty predictable, right? That's one of the first things you learn if you're a tool using species, is that the year is relatively predictable. That almanacs are, pretty simple to put together. Look at the last 20 winters. What did it do on July 13th? That's probably what it's going to do this July 13th, right? So yeah, let's talk about calendars. That's pretty good. I think for something like for something like MCDM, the first thing we would start with is the history of the universe. And that would be the first thing. Before the calendar, you would get, all right, let's have a timeline of the timescape, including things like when did Val? No, you can't have that. When did Ord put the dwarves into the world? Good question. All right. And then how long until the humans show up? Okay. And what was the first human empire and how long did it last? Good question. All the way down to when did Good King Omen die? How long did Good King Omen rule? That's the kind of thing that people need. So I think we would get some